Hi, and welcome to Reddit Confessions. This is not a story about a man discovering betrayal. This is a story about what happens when silence hits louder than rage, and when the quiet one finally walks out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say a single word. She was still mid-laugh when I placed the envelope on the table. That irritating, breathy giggle she reserves for her work calls. I used to think it was charming. Now, it sounded like a performance. She didn't even notice me at first. She was too busy circling her wine glass with her index finger, eyes glued to her phone, whispering, "No, he's clueless. He still makes me tea like I'm his precious little wife." I stood right there, in the doorway, invisible in my own home. I watched the woman I had devoted 11 years of my life to say I was clueless. And the worst part? She was right. I was clueless. Clueless for thinking the way she touched her hair meant she was flirting only with me. Clueless for believing girls' weekend meant hotel spas and not hotel beds. Clueless for thinking loyalty was mutual. I had the papers in my coat pocket. The print was still warm. I'd signed them that morning. My lawyer had said, "We can courier these." But I said no. She deserved to feel it in real time. So I waited. Waited for her to finish saying whatever poisonous thing she needed to say. She didn't know I was home early. She didn't even check. She never does. "Yeah, he's making dinner. I can smell something burning," she laughed. I wasn't. There was no dinner. I walked across the living room slowly. The sound of my steps finally made her glance up. And when she saw me, she froze. Like a child caught stealing from the cookie jar. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. I pulled the envelope from my pocket and placed it right next to her wine glass. No theatrics. No clever speech. Just paper. Cold, permanent, and final. She looked down, confused, like she wasn't sure if it was a joke. Her hand hovered above it, trembling slightly. She opened it. The silence that followed? Heavier than any shouting match. She read the first few lines, and staggered back like I'd slapped her across the face. "Lowell, wait. Please. Can we talk?" I didn't reply. She stood, knocking over the wine. It bled across the table, a deep red mess soaking into the divorce packet. Poetic, really. "Don't do this," she said, voice cracking. "We can fix it. We can work through this." I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't even crying. She was performing, like she had 1,000 times before. A small tear at the corner of her eye, carefully measured. No makeup smudged. "Please," she whispered again. "I made mistakes, but I didn't think you'd leave." I almost spoke. I almost told her about the months I spent blaming myself. About the nights I stared at the ceiling wondering why I wasn't enough. About the gut punches that came from every suspicious laugh, every vague text, every new password. But I didn't. I just grabbed my keys and walked out. The wine continued bleeding through the envelope behind me. She didn't follow. But I know she's going to. Because the next part of this story, that's where it gets worse, for both of us. I didn't check into a hotel. I didn't go to a friend's place. I drove. No destination, no music, no plan. Just me and the road. With the envelope still fresh in my mind, bleeding red wine across the final line of our marriage. I didn't cry. That was the strangest part. You'd think after 11 years of devotion, catching your wife mid-flirt while she mocks your existence would break you. But I wasn't broken. I was just hollow. It was almost midnight when I pulled into the gravel lot of a closed-down diner 2 towns over. There was an old neon sign above the boarded windows, still flickering like it didn't know the place was dead. Kind of like me, honestly. I reclined my seat and stared at the ceiling. And then my phone started buzzing. Over and over. Her name lit up the screen 5 times in the next 10 minutes. Then came the texts. At first, they were gentle. "Please come home." I didn't mean it like that. "We can talk." Then a guilt trip. "You didn't even give me a chance to explain. That's not fair." Followed by anger. "If you think this is mature, you're insane. Grow up." I turned the phone off. But in the silence, all those words still rang in my head. Her voice had this way of seeping into my thoughts, even when she wasn't speaking. That's how it had always been. She didn't shout. She dripped. Small, constant droplets of control. A sigh here. A glance there. And suddenly I was apologizing for things I hadn't even done. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in that old parking lot watching moths dance around the broken neon, trying to piece together when everything started to rot. It wasn't one moment. It was erosion, quiet and slow. The kind you don't notice until the whole floor caves in. By morning, I drove back to the house. Not to talk, not to forgive, just to get my things. I didn't expect her to be there. She usually leaves early for yoga on Thursdays, which, knowing what I now know, probably meant coffee and hand-holding with the guy from the video call. But when I opened the door, she was sitting in the middle of the floor, legs crossed, robe still on, her face pale like she hadn't slept either. The moment she saw me, she scrambled to her feet and said my name like I'd just come back from war. "Lowell," she breathed. Thank God. I didn't speak. I walked past her, straight to the bedroom, grabbed the duffel from the closet. Socks, shirts, a few books, the watch my father gave me. She followed me in like a shadow. "Please say something. Anything," she begged. I paused, zipped the bag, and looked up. "You said I was wallpaper," I muttered. "So maybe it's time you redecorate." Her face contorted like she'd been slapped. "You heard that." I nodded. She started crying. The kind of crying that used to move me, back when I believed her tears meant regret. Now, all I saw was panic, not over losing me, but over losing control. "Lowell," I was venting. "That wasn't real. You know how I get when I talk to." "You don't have to explain," I said. "You already did. On camera." That stopped her. "Dead? What do you mean?" "The cloud. You forgot your video app syncs with the shared account." She went ghost white. A full second passed before she dropped to sit on the edge of the bed. "You watched it?" "All of it." Her voice trembled. "He doesn't mean anything. It wasn't like that." That made me laugh, the first genuine sound I'd made in days. "So I imagined you telling him I was a burden? That I drained your spark? That you're only staying for the mortgage?" She couldn't answer. I stood up, shouldered my bag, and looked at the room that once felt like home. The walls were still covered in framed photos of vacations and smiles that apparently meant nothing. "I'm staying at the old place," I said. "The rental you hate. The one with the tiny kitchen and the peeling wallpaper. Remember that? You called it pathetic." Her eyes flicked up. "Lowell, wait." But I was already walking out. And then she did something I wasn't ready for. She screamed. Not like someone in pain. Like someone losing. She followed me to the porch, barefoot, yelling after me that I was being cruel, that I was abandoning her, that we had years together. But you can't abandon someone who let go of you first. I got into my car. The engine coughed to life. She was still crying when I reversed out of the driveway. I saw her silhouette in the mirror, arms crossed over her chest like she was holding herself together. And maybe she was. But I wasn't there to hold her anymore. 3 days passed before I heard from her again. I expected a flood of messages, maybe another guilt trip, maybe some fiery accusations, something typical. But instead, there was nothing. Just silence. The kind that hums behind your ears and crawls under your skin when you lie awake at night wondering if you imagined the whole thing. I'd moved into the old rental house on Elbridge Street, the one we used to joke about when we were newlyweds. "If we ever end up here," she once said, laughing, "just put me out of my misery." Well, misery had arrived, but I was the one turning the key. It was small, dusty, and filled with the stale scent of old pine cleaner and cardboard. But it was mine. There were no wine glasses with lipstick stains, no floral-scented pillows, no passive-aggressive notes on the fridge reminding me to wipe down after cooking. For once, I didn't feel observed. But then came the letter. I found it at 6:17 a.m. On the third morning. Folded once. No envelope. Just a single page sitting neatly on my doormat, sealed with a smear of what looked like raspberry lip gloss. Her handwriting was unmistakable. Those long, curvy loops she always bragged made her penmanship elegant. I should have thrown it out. I should have burned it. But I didn't. I brought it inside, sat down at the kitchen table that barely fit 2 chairs, and read. "Lowell, if you're reading this, it means you're still mad. I get that. I do. But I need you to understand something. That night, the call, it wasn't what you think. You weren't supposed to hear it. It wasn't meant for you. I was venting, saying things I didn't mean. You know how I get when I'm frustrated. You were never wallpaper. You were my gravity. Please don't vanish like this. Please don't let silence be our ending. I'm still your wife. Petula." I reread that last line 3 times. You were never wallpaper. You were my gravity. That would have melted me once. Before. But now, all I felt was unease. She wasn't trying to apologize. She was trying to rewrite the script. I put the letter down and stared at the wall for a long time. My stomach felt like it was filled with wet cement. It wasn't the letter that bothered me. It was what wasn't in it. No mention of him. No acknowledgement of what she said on the call. No ownership. Just metaphorical fluff designed to reel me back into the orbit she thought I still wanted. A few hours later, my phone rang. I shouldn't have picked up, but I did. It was her mother. Now, let me pause here to say, her mom, Claudette, never liked me. Not outright hatred, but subtle, Southern-style disapproval, wrapped in backhanded compliments and fake smiles. She once said to Petula in front of me, "Well, at least he's loyal. That's something." Claudette's voice came through sharp and sweet, like a knife dipped in honey. "Lowell, sweetheart, Petula's not doing well. She says you left in a rage. That you scared her. That you're having some kind of emotional episode." I nearly choked. "What?" She said you stormed out. That you're refusing to talk. That you're not yourself lately. I just want to be sure you're not unwell. Unwell. That word slapped harder than anything I'd felt so far. She was painting me as unstable. Me, the man who washed her car, packed her lunches, and never raised his voice even when I found out she was cheating. I told Claudette the truth. About the video call, the texts, the wine glass, the papers, and silence followed on her end. Not because she was shocked, but because I think, deep down, she already knew. Her voice softened. "Well, I suppose there are two sides to every story." That's when I hung up. Later that night, I drove to the one place I swore I'd never return, the old lake house where we spent our first anniversary. It had been empty for years, a silent witness to memories I wanted to drown. But I had a key. I sat on the porch overlooking the frozen water and thought about how easily someone can rewrite reality if you let them. Petula wasn't grieving me. She was losing control of her version of the story. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to be silent anymore. If she wanted to play games, I'd play defense. I would document everything. Every call, every message, every harmless visit she attempted. I'd already let myself be the quiet, agreeable man for too long. Now I'd become something else entirely. Not vengeful, not cruel, but finally awake. It was the knock on the glass that told me I'd made a mistake not changing the locks. I was half asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled faintly like mothballs and forgotten summers. My phone had died sometime after midnight, and the fireplace was glowing just enough to paint the living room in soft orange. I didn't jump. I didn't scramble. I just sat there for a second, staring at the shadow on the porch. And I knew. It wasn't the landlord. Not a neighbor. It was her. Petula. Wearing the same oversized coat she used to wear when we'd sneak out for ice cream at midnight. Hair pulled into that loose bun she always said made her look innocent, like she was playing a part. I opened the door slowly, more out of habit than desire. And there she was, arms folded, lip gloss smudged, eyes glassy. "Hi," she whispered. I didn't answer. "I was hoping you'd be here," she added, stepping inside before I could stop her. She moved through the room like she still belonged in it, eyes darting over the boxes, the dusty lamp, the unwashed mug near the fireplace. "You haven't unpacked," she said, almost with a hint of relief. "That's a good sign, right?" Still, I said nothing. "I brought something," she continued, reaching into her coat and pulling out a small, thick manila folder. My stomach dropped. For a second, I thought she'd beaten me to some legal ambush, a counterfiling, maybe. But no. She handed it to me with the same smile she used when she used to surprise me with birthday cards. "Open it." Inside were printed photos. Not of us. Not of him. But of her. Alone. Dressed up. Carefully lit. Posed. Almost like a professional shoot. There was something oddly desperate about the way she stared into the lens, as if trying to recapture a version of herself that no longer existed. "What is this?" I asked quietly, my voice finally cracking through. "It's what I'm willing to offer," she said, "in exchange for stopping this. For not going through with the divorce." I stared at her, trying to decipher what kind of alternate reality she was living in. "You think that's going to change anything?" I asked. "You think photos, flattery, bargaining, that's going to erase what you said?" She blinked, her face twitching just slightly. "I thought maybe, if you remembered who I was. What we had. You're not thinking straight, Lowell. You're spiraling. You don't want to throw this away just because you got your feelings hurt." "Got my feelings hurt?" I nearly laughed. "You told someone I was dead weight. That I drained your spark. That staying married to me was a form of emotional charity. And now you're handing me glamour shots like I'm supposed to forget it all? She took a step forward. I didn't mean those things. Stop saying that. I cut in. You meant it. You just didn't mean for me to hear it. Her jaw clenched. That smile, the one that used to feel like home, morphed into something tight, bitter. You don't get it, do you? I've spent years pretending. Years supporting you while you played safe, lived small, refused to grow. I just needed something more. There it is, I said, pointing at her like I'd just solved a riddle. That's the part you've been avoiding. You wanted more. And you didn't have the spine to ask for it. So you lied, you cheated, and now you're here acting like I'm the one destroying everything. She paused, and then, with the calm of a surgeon about to cut into the truth, she said, I didn't come here to fight, Lowell. I came here to negotiate. Negotiate. She sat on the edge of the couch and crossed her legs like we were in some casual business meeting. You can walk away with dignity. Quietly. We tell people it was mutual. No ugly details. No blame. I even already drafted the joint statement we can post online. I put your name first. My heart dropped. Not because of what she said, but how coldly prepared she was for it. Like this was her backup plan all along. Like love had nothing to do with it. And if I don't agree? I asked. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. Then you'll find out just how good I am at controlling a narrative. That was it. The final crack. I stood there, watching her return to form. The composed, calculating version of the woman I once married. A woman who was now standing in my living room, negotiating my silence. No, I said, voice low. You don't get to rewrite this story. Not again. Not this time. She opened her mouth to say something else, but I cut her off. Get out. Her face barely changed. Just a tiny twitch near her eyebrow. But she stood, slowly, gathered her coat, left the folder on the table. You'll regret this, she whispered as she passed me on the way to the door. But I didn't reply. I didn't slam the door behind her. I didn't burn the folder. I just sat down on the floor and stared at the photographs. She wasn't trying to win me back. She was trying to erase the version of me that existed after she broke me. And I knew then, this wasn't over. Not even close. It started with a tag. I hadn't even been online. I deactivated my Facebook the same day I left Petula, thinking it would help me breathe a little easier without seeing her filtered photos and fake affirmations. But my cousin Callie, the only person in my family who wasn't already skeptical of me for walking out, sent a screenshot with no context and just one word. Seriously? There it was. On Petula's brand new post. A photo of us from 2 years ago, smiling at a lake, completely unaware we were already dying underneath. The caption read, not every love story is perfect, but we're choosing to grow. Privately. Respectfully. Together. Yellow heart. She'd tagged me. And because my account was deactivated, it showed up as gray text, but still visible. My jaw clenched so hard I thought a molar cracked. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was a campaign. A repackaging. She was putting out a press release for a marriage that didn't exist anymore, and painting herself as the gracious, wounded spouse who had nothing but forgiveness in her heart. The comments made it worse. People I hadn't spoken to in years were flooding in with things like, you two are such a strong couple. So inspiring. Praying for your healing journey. Love always wins. Ignore the haters. Protect your energy. I nearly vomited. It wasn't just fake. It was evil. She was building a fortress of sympathy, brick by brick, while I sat alone in a collapsing house she helped set on fire. And I knew exactly what this was, insurance. She was preparing the world for a version of events where I looked unstable, cold, unpredictable. And when I told the truth, I'd be dismissed as bitter. I took a screenshot of the post and sent it to my lawyer. He called me within 10 minutes. Do not engage publicly, he warned. Not yet. Let her build the lie. The higher she climbs, the harder she'll fall, but only if you stay clean. So I stayed silent. But inside, I was boiling. The next day, 2 of our so-called mutual friends, Nolan and Kara, messaged me, clearly baiting. Nolan asked if I was feeling better, as if I'd had some mental break. Kara sent me a voice note that began with, I don't know what Petula told you, but relationships are complicated and maybe you shouldn't rush into throwing everything away. I ignored them both. But then came the voicemail. I was brushing my teeth when the phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, local, but unfamiliar. The kind you hesitate to pick up in case it's spam, or worse, someone you thought you were done with. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, the notification popped up. I hit play. It was her voice. Quiet. Steady. I could tell she was sitting alone, likely in her car. Lowell, I just wanted you to know I'm sorry for everything. I miss you. I miss what we had. But if you're going to start making this ugly, if you're going to start dragging my name through the mud, I'll have no choice but to protect myself. You know how things can sound when taken out of context. I don't want to do that to you, but I will if I have to. There was a pause. And then, let's just keep this civil, okay? We both have things to lose. Click. I stood in the hallway with toothpaste foaming in my mouth and an ache forming deep in my stomach that felt radioactive. She wasn't just preparing to lie. She was warning me not to tell the truth. That voicemail wasn't a plea. It was a threat dressed as concern. My hands trembled as I sent the recording to my lawyer. He responded with one sentence. We need to start documenting everything, effective immediately. The trap was springing. Slowly, deliberately. She was laying the groundwork for something bigger, something potentially ruinous. And I had to decide whether to quietly let her rewrite history or build my own arsenal of truth. I wasn't a fighter. I never had been. I used to believe walking away was strength. That silence was power. But now I realized, silence only works when the other person isn't filling the vacuum with poison. She was poisoning every inch of our shared past. Every photo, every friend, every word. And unless I acted soon, I'd be the villain in a story I never even agreed to star in. I didn't know it had begun, not until my boss knocked on my office door with a look I'd only ever seen once before. The day someone called in a false bomb threat to our building, and he had to evacuate everyone at 3 p.m. on a Friday. Lowell, he said, frowning like he was trying not to make it a big deal. Got a minute? I did, but I wish I hadn't. He closed the door behind him. Saturday. Folded his hands. Didn't make eye contact at first. I got something from HR this morning. About you. My stomach dropped. You don't expect to hear those words when you've spent your whole adult life being the quiet guy in the office. The one who restocks the printer without being asked. The guy who organizes birthday cards and remembers people's pets' names. I was not the HR kind of guy. I was wallpaper. But that was exactly the problem, wasn't it? I blinked slowly. About what? He hesitated. We received a confidential message from someone claiming to be close to you. Not an employee here, alleging that you've been showing signs of emotional instability. I could barely speak. What? They didn't name themselves, but the language was careful. Said you were under intense emotional stress, possibly retaliatory, and that you might not be in a safe state of mind to be working in a supervisory capacity. Said you were volatile. That word hit like a hammer to the chest. Volatile? Me? I stared at him. Do you believe that? He looked pained. No, but protocol says we have to take it seriously. And just like that, the walls started closing in. They weren't firing me. Yet. But I was pulled from client-facing work for a few weeks, pending internal assessment. I was assigned busy work. Things I hadn't done since my first year on the job. I walked out of that meeting in a fog. But I didn't have to ask who made the complaint. I already knew. Petula. And what chilled me wasn't just that she'd done it. It was how clever she had been. She didn't use her name. She didn't say anything provably false. She used phrases like erratic behavior, emotional compromise, and potential concern for others. Words that didn't accuse, but insinuated. Words designed to stain me quietly. I sat in my car for 2 hours after work, gripping the steering wheel and replaying everything in my mind. The voicemail, the Facebook post, the letter, the late-night visit. It was all part of something bigger, something calculated. She wasn't trying to stop the divorce. She was trying to control the divorce. Control me. Control the narrative. And she'd only just begun. When I got home, if you could even call the rental house home anymore, I went into autopilot. Made toast. Burned it. Didn't care. I was halfway through eating the blackened corner when my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. I braced myself. And sure enough, it was another friendly message. Hey Lowell, it's Jay from the board game group. Just wanted to check in. Heard some stuff. No idea if it's true, but man, if you ever want to talk, I'm around. You've always been chill. Hope things aren't, too heavy. Jay, the guy who once cried because someone bumped his Settlers of Caton Road and broke his longest route. Even Jay thought I was a ticking time bomb now. That's when I logged back into my old shared Google Drive. I hadn't touched it since I moved out. We hadn't officially separated finances yet, part of the delay with the divorce. I figured maybe I could at least download some old tax files. I shouldn't have gone in there. There were new folders. Dozens. Hidden under a generic name, Project Dusk. Curious, I opened one. Inside were notes. Long, carefully curated documents. Timelines. Messages. Transcriptions of things I'd said in the past, out of context, trimmed like sound bites. Screenshots of our calendar events with annotations like, Lowell became agitated. Note this for future statement. It wasn't just a narrative she was building, it was a case. A case for something legal. Maybe for full control of our assets. Maybe more. It felt like I'd walked into a courtroom where the trial had already started, and I was the defendant who didn't know he was being prosecuted. I sat in the dark staring at that screen, my throat dry, my hands numb, and one thought looping through my head. She's not scared of losing me. She's scared of losing control over how I leave. I called my lawyer at 1:27 a.m. He picked up, groggy, but when I told him what I'd found, he woke up fast. We need to move, he said. Fast. This isn't about separation anymore. She's building a record of mental instability. And if she's doing that, she's planning to come after something. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even close my eyes. I just sat there, staring at the wall, while the only person who'd ever called me home began preparing to legally paint me as a man no one would trust. And all I'd done was walk away. I don't know what's worse, being betrayed by someone you love, or realizing you've been helping them do it without even knowing. After discovering the Project Dusk folder, I started seeing the last 6 months of my life with terrifying clarity. Every time Petula had asked about my schedule, every time she randomly brought up therapy just in case we needed it, every time she'd casually asked for the login to my insurance portal, I thought it was concern. I thought it meant she wanted us to work. In truth, she'd been preparing the battlefield while I was still laying down the welcome mat. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. It was late Friday morning, and I was halfway through a mandatory mental wellness evaluation Zoom session HR had required after the anonymous complaint. I sat stiffly in front of my webcam while a stranger in wire-rimmed glasses asked me questions about my coping mechanisms, emotional regulation, and whether I had any recent urges to self-isolate or lash out. It was humiliating, robotic, like my sanity was a form I had to fill out. But the real punch came that afternoon. I was organizing documents in the back office, pointless admin work they'd shoved on me to keep me away from people, when my phone buzzed. A single message from my bank app. Unusual activity detected on joint account ending in 22. Withdrawal of $8,000 approved. I stared at the screen like it had been written in another language. Joint account? That account was frozen. We had signed the temporary hold ourselves, together, during one of our early mediation sessions. No solo access. No movement allowed. I rushed outside to call the bank. After 15 minutes of navigating an automated hellscape, I finally got a live rep. Yes, sir, the transaction was verified through our two-step security process, she said flatly. A voice call and biometric confirmation through the mobile app. I didn't approve it, I said. There was a pause. Then, according to our records, the confirmation came from a secondary account holder. Petula Rennet. I hung up without saying goodbye. My fingers were shaking as I called my lawyer, who confirmed what I was terrified to hear. Somehow, despite the lock, she had slipped the funds through by exploiting a back-end clause, the kind most people never think to read. She hadn't broken the law. Not exactly. But she had found a way to bend it just far enough to hurt me, and then vanish before it snapped. And that's when I snapped. I drove to the one person I thought I could trust, Nolan. He'd been my friend since college. The guy who helped me propose to Petula, the guy who was there when my dad died, the guy who lent me money once without ever asking when I'd pay him back. If anyone could help me, it was him. He lived in a quiet neighborhood 20 minutes outside the city. The drive there was a blur. By the time I pulled into his driveway, my knuckles were white from how hard I'd been gripping the wheel. He answered on the second knock. Lowell, he said, eyebrows raised. Everything okay? Can we talk? I asked. Of course. We sat on his back patio. I told him everything, from the voicemail to the HR report, to the account withdrawal, to the Google Drive. I was unraveling, and he could see it. I expected him to nod, to get angry with me, to say something like, "We'll fix this together." But instead, he leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and said, "She told me you might show up." That's when my stomach dropped. What? She told me you'd be spiraling, that you might try to turn people against her, that you might not be thinking clearly. She told me a lot, man. I felt like I'd been hit in the chest with a sledgehammer. Have you been talking to her? While all this is happening? He shrugged. She reached out, said she was scared. I figured hearing her side couldn't hurt. You've been feeding her information about me? I wouldn't put it that way, he said carefully. But yeah, I've kept her updated. She didn't want to blindside you, Lowell. She wanted me to help you stay grounded. Grounded? I snapped. She just stole 8 grand and tried to get me suspended from my job. You can't prove that, he replied. And even if she did, maybe she thought she needed to protect herself. That was it. That was the moment. The final betrayal. I stood. You chose her. He didn't deny it. She didn't make me choose, man. You made it easy by acting like this. I left without another word. That night, I sat in the parking lot of an empty strip mall, eating cold gas station noodles with plastic chopsticks and trying not to break down in front of my own reflection. I had no allies left. My name was slowly being smeared in every room I couldn't enter. And worse, she still had control over things I didn't even realize I'd left open. That's when I got another notification. A calendar alert from our shared iCloud. Dinner with Counselor Maddox, Monday at 6 p.m. Custody strategy meeting. Custody. We didn't have kids. Not together. But I had a dog. My dog. Molly. 12 years old. She'd been mine since before I even met Petula. But Petula had always said Molly was ours. And now she was scheduling legal consultations to take my dog. She wasn't trying to ruin me. She was trying to erase me. The courtroom was smaller than I imagined. No dramatic chandeliers, no booming echoes, just quiet shuffling feet, whispered conversations, and the smell of printer paper and cheap carpet cleaner. I hadn't seen Petula in person since the night she came to the rental. But there she was, 3 rows ahead, flanked by her lawyer and her posture. Always perfect, like she practiced strength in front of the mirror. She didn't look at me when I walked in. She didn't have to. The smirk was already waiting for me. Like she thought she'd won before the judge even sat down. She didn't know what I had. The hearing was about finances and property division. On paper, it was about closing the books on a marriage. But everyone in that room knew this was a war disguised as paperwork. Her side spoke first, about emotional distress, about instability, about concerning behaviors she had gently tried to address, about how I was reactive and impulsive. Her lawyer was a pro. Calm, smooth, practiced. The narrative was tight, well-rehearsed. She had spent months framing me as a ghost of a man unraveling. But then it was our turn. My lawyer stood and calmly introduced the folder. Exhibit B, full transcript of audio and video recordings from cloud-synced sources. Exhibit C, metadata proving timeline manipulation. Exhibit D, a certified forensic breakdown of the withdrawal pattern on the joint account. The judge reviewed the packet slowly, then asked the question, Ms. Rennett, were you aware your own devices recorded these files? The silence was nuclear. Her lawyer leaned in. Petula's eyes darted. She stammered something about privacy and miscommunication, but the tone had changed. Suddenly, she wasn't a victim. She was someone who had been caught building a lie on top of a lie. Then came the final blow. My lawyer called a surprise witness, my therapist. Yes, I'd started seeing one after leaving her. And yes, every session had been documented. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted to be okay. I just didn't know how. The therapist took the stand and calmly, professionally, explained that I'd never once expressed harm toward Petula, myself, or anyone. That I had shown textbook symptoms of long-term psychological manipulation. That I had not unraveled, but instead began a long, painful process of self-rediscovery. The courtroom was still. Even her lawyer didn't object. By the time the judge delivered his ruling, I already knew the outcome. She didn't get the money back. She didn't get Molly. And most importantly, she didn't get to keep the story. Because now it was mine. As we exited the courtroom, she tried to catch my eye. Just once. She looked like she wanted to say something. Maybe to spin one last angle. But I didn't give her the chance. I walked out into the sunlight, took a deep breath, and smiled for the first time in months. Not because I had won, but because I was done. No more spinning in circles trying to prove I wasn't the villain. No more quietly shrinking so she could take up the whole narrative. No more being wallpaper. I was the whole damn wall now, rebuilt from the ground up. That evening, I sat on the floor with Molly curled at my feet, drinking peppermint tea in silence. Real silence. Not the kind she used to weaponize, the kind that actually lets you hear your own heartbeat again. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was free. Thanks for watching Reddit Confessions. If you've ever had to quietly rebuild your life after someone tried to rewrite your story, drop it in the comments. What moment made you walk away? And hey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another true story. See you next time on Reddit Confessions.